Okay, welcome to pre-reading for Chapter 16 in our elementary Latin textbook. The ancient Roman historian Livy is very famous. We especially know about the early years of ancient Rome from his writing that have survived the wrecks of time. One of the most famous episodes in the history that Livy wrote, which he titled Ab Urbe Condita, or From the Founding of the City, involves the very early days of Rome when they were at war with their mother, the town Alba Longa, which had given birth to Rome. But instead of having the two entire armies fight, they chose 3 brothers from each side to duke it out. But I'm going to start here this morning with a short video. It's about 6 minutes, which talks about this very famous painting by Louis David from 1784. There's a little background. Pay close attention to the Roman history part of it, but I hope that you'll find the other information about the painting and the movement in art that it started interesting. So, to the video.
We're standing in one of the largest galleries in the Louvre in Paris. It's filled with enormous paintings. We're looking at Louis David's Oath of the Horatii. This is a painting that was made in 1784 and exhibited in 1785. And this painting stole the show. It was absolutely new. Nobody had ever seen anything like it.
The prevailing style in France was the Rococo. We could think about artists like Boucher or Fragonard, a style that appealed to the aristocracy.
And even in the kind of history painting that was made for the king, the style had become formulaic. It had become tired. But David's Oath of the Horatii establishes a new style that we call neoclassicism.
Critics like Diderot are calling for an art that depicts virtuous behavior, very different from the prevailing Rococo style, and this painting answers that call.
This is the tail end of the period in France that we call the Enlightenment, with philosophers like Rousseau, Diderot, and Voltaire, who posit the idea that the rational should supersede tradition and the spiritual.
The church was incredibly powerful. The monarchy in France was incredibly powerful. And the philosophers of the Enlightenment are asking questions about the validity of these very established institutions.
And remember, it will only be a few years before the French Revolution begins.
Right. This is exhibited in 1785. The Revolution is 1789.
And the American Revolution has already taken place, based in large part on the ideas of French Enlightenment philosophers.
We have a story from early ancient Roman history.
The early Roman state is at war with the neighboring city of Alba.
But instead of the armies of each side going to war, they decide to send 3 brothers from each side to battle it out. Whoever survives is the side that's victorious.
The Romans choose the Horatii, and the city of Alba chooses the Horatii.
But things get very complicated because there are intermarriages between these 2 families. So no matter who wins,
both sides will lose.
Exactly.
What we see is the father of the Horatii holding swords aloft as the sons take an oath to battle to the death.
For Rome.
On the right, we see 3 women and 2 children. There's some disagreement as to who the woman in blue is in the back.
We see 2 young women in the foreground. One of them is a Horatii sister, and she's married to one of the Horatii brothers.
The other is a Horatii by birth, but will marry one of the Horatii.
Families will be torn apart by this battle.
No matter what happens.
By making the women appear so curvilinear, so passive, they don't even have their eyes open. David is suggesting an idea that was very prevalent in the philosophy of Rousseau, for example, that women could not be true citizens of the state. They were unable to think about civic responsibility. Women could only think about the personal and the familial.
And look at how David has depicted depicted that contrast. If the women are curvilinear, if their bodies are limp, the male figures are rigid, they are upright, they are tall, they are strong.
They are angular in the forms of their bodies. They raise their arms together. There's a sense of purpose that is completely absent from the women who appear to be just victims of circumstance here.
The young men are working in unison. Their arms salute in unison. There is clearly a reverence for the idea of strength in a kind of brotherhood, in a kind of collective.
David represents all of this in a classical, classicizing style, looking back to ancient Greece and Rome. There is an interest in the anatomy of the body, of carefully depicting the musculature, the movement of the body that is directly from ancient Greek and Roman art.
In fact, the lighting, which rakes across the surface, reminds me of an ancient Greek or Roman relief carving. And all of this is set within a simplified stone interior with rounded Roman arches, simplified Tuscan columns, and a pavement that creates a geometric stage for these figures.
And if we follow the orthogonal lines created by that pavement, we end at a vanishing point.
Right where the father's hand clasps the swords.
If we think about the lushness, the luxuriousness of Rococo painting, to me this painting is the exact opposite. It's one that speaks of the virtue of simplicity over the indulgence of the Rococo style, exactly what the Enlightenment philosophers were calling for artists to do.
And audiences recognized that stark contrast. In fact, the salon had to stay open longer than it had originally been scheduled just to accommodate the numbers of people that wanted to see it.
One of the most fascinating things about this painting is that during the Revolution, the brothers and their willingness to die for their country resonates with the revolutionaries who must make sacrifices of themselves and their families for the ideals of the revolution.
And David does become a revolutionary himself, and so it's very tempting to read back into this painting. But we have to remember that the painting was completed several years before the revolution, although it was certainly informed by the same philosophical values that the revolution was founded on.
David not only becomes a revolutionary, he votes for the beheading of the king. We're talking about an artist who is very politically engaged.
And this painting becomes an icon for the revolution.
When I look at this painting, I sense that patriotic fervor that must have been so palpable in the early years of the revolution when people were able to rise up against the abuses of a monarchy and to begin to imagine a republic for France.
Okay, so that brings us to our reading, number 20, adapted from Titios Livius ab Urbe Candida. You have the background, and we have the two sets of triplets, the Horatii and the Horatii. There's a Horatii sister who's engaged to a Horatii brother, and a Horatii sister who's married to a Horatii brother. So this is just going to be a mess. It kind of reminds us a little bit of an incident we have in the Bible, in the book of 2 Samuel, where Joab says they were bored and they were sitting around, and he says, let's have some of the young men fight for us. All right. But there's more on the line here. Alba Longa was maybe about 20 miles from Rome. And as you'll learn next year in the Aeneid, this was really the mother city that started Rome, gave birth to Romulus and Remus, and they launched out on their own and founded the city of Rome. So let's take a look at the Latin here. Of course, on the next page, you have the vocabulary, okay? So some of the vocabulary that's unfamiliar, we have the Albans here, that people from Alba Longa. We have Tullius Hostilius, the third king of Rome. And then we have the Etruscans who are across the river. And I think that's it for capitalized words and names. Okay, so What, of course, we need to do is we also need to find the subject, and here we have a plural subject, and there's our verb. Okay, and here's another. We have a break here, right? And here we have a second verb. Okay, now here, subject, and now we have something that we really haven't dealt with, but that is we have a direct quote. Okay, you can see here, and this starts out right away with the verb. Okay, oh, I'm sorry, not cupido, not cupidio. I take that back. Here's our verb. Okay, now here we have our new word race. Well, I'm going to leave that here right now. Etrusca, race, subject, verb. Now, cum, well, here, verb, verb, subject, verb, okay, subject, verb, subject, verb, here, this form especially you'll want to be particularly attentive to, all right? Discerni, but let's continue on here. Tollus, consented, ratio, invenitur, and then we have a dependent clause. Okay, so now let's go back. Okay, now let's chunk. Okay, look at your prepositions. Okay, and there, okay, you have these very natural chunks. Here we have a relative clause. Okay, remember that doesn't get interrupted until there's a verb. Okay, now here, cum, in this case means when. Okay, so that's a dependent clause. Okay, I should say feci erunt. Now we've had passive verb forms. You should recognize that. Okay, we have a tum. Okay, now here another preposition. Sine multo sanguine. Okay, notice the case of this, utriusque. Just drop the que, that just means et. Okay. Here we have another dependent clause. Quamquam means although. That goes until there's a verb. Okay, here we have another relative clause. Okay, now here, what case is this? Qui. Okay. What case is that, right? And be very literal. You've had this construction a number of chapters ago. All right? So when you break it down, all right, when you break it down into chunks, it's not so bad. Now I'm going to switch colors again. Okay? Things that you need to watch for. I'm just going to put a circle by the things you need to watch for. That will probably throw you off a little bit unless you think about it. Okay, militum, in that, what declension, what case. This is a genitive, and we talked about that yesterday. It goes with cupido. Okay, we talked about this type of genitive recently in class. Okay, here's another object chunk. Now, quae is a relative pronoun. What gender is it? That'll tell you. Okay, now we've had res publica, but now we have Etrusca res. Okay, and here within this relative pronoun, we have a preposition circa, right? Here, cum, I told you means when. But now the verb here, what person is this? Dabis. Okay. What tense is pugnabunt? What form is feci erunt? Okay. And then right here is kind of the deal. The Alban leader proposed this, and then Tullius, the Roman king, listened to the proposal, and now he's going to agree to it. Okay? Now, this form I've told you to look for, but you know what to look for because it's potest. And what kind of verb form is possum usually followed by? Okay? I've talked about this, praebuit, watch the tense on that. And you'll have to just kind of massage a definition for materia. Okay, so that's a little bit of the pre-reading for Part A. After you type in your translation for Part A, we can continue with pre-reading for Part 2. Okay, and that will be on a different video. Voila!